Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to another Whiskey-Me tasting. We will just tread water here for a moment as more people join. Don't want to say important things that everyone misses because they joined a minute or two late. We don't punish people like that. Super excited tonight for more than one reason. First of all, we have a very rare whiskey to taste. So rare, in fact, that you lucky people are pretty much the only people that have it. And we also have a super special guest as well. Not going to talk about the whiskey yet because the guest is going to talk about that with me. Our guest tonight is an old friend of mine, fellow Cornishman as well, Mr. Colin Dunn. Colin works for Diageo as a whiskey ambassador and has done that role for 12 or 13 years now. I know this because I joined Diageo at pretty much the same day he did. However, I left much sooner. He is well-loved, well-known whiskey expert all around the UK and occasionally international, although he doesn't do as much international as he probably should. A font of knowledge, incredible whiskey collector, a great tasting partner of mine, especially when it comes to Japanese whiskey. And it's about time we had him on the live stream. So I'm going to bring him in now. Hello, Colin.
Fantastic. Can I just say two things happened today? I got two deliveries from Cornwall. I got my pasties from Philps in Hale, 6 pasties and some mince pies sent up.
All set for Christmas.
And also I got this.
You got your Whiskey-Me.
Which is my Whiskey-Me, which I'm very, very privileged to have. And I remember when you started with this idea, this concept, which I thought was excellent. And I remember using the vending machine at Black Rock in East London. And thank you so much for inviting me on to join you for a whiskey conversation.
It's crazy we've not had you on already because you're a good friend of both mine and Tom's, and we of course have featured many Diageo whiskies. But here's the thing: a lot of the whiskies we've featured actually have a sort of dedicated ambassador sort of tied to them, whereas Glen Elgin, the whiskey we're tasting tonight, really has nobody. It's a bit of a hidden gem. So and you, I mean. You're not really tied to any one malt or brand within Diageo, right? You work across pretty much all of them.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, Glen Elgin, I'm reminded often by the powers that be up there at Diageo that we're a blending company that also produces single malts, and of those 28 distilleries, sad but reality, because of the success of blends. It's still, I don't know, about 90 odd % of the market. Glen Elgin is massive in White Horse, the White Horse blend, which is drunk in copious amounts in markets like South America, Brazil. It's incredibly popular. So only a small amount gets into single malts. There's probably more Glen Elgin in independent bottlings than there are in official bottlings from Diageo. But the history of it's really quite simple. I mean, I won't give you an encyclopedia of everything about Glen Elgin, but there's really 6 real dates that hit the spot. 1898, that was when it was formed. Started by the ex-Glen Farclas, who I think you had on last month. The ex-Glen Farclas manager, not the same guy, obviously. William Simpson and James Kyle, they got together, built a distillery. 3 years later, went bankrupt, sold the distillery in 1901 for £4,000. They didn't do too well. They sold it on in 1906 to a French wine company, a French guy called J.J. Blanche, which sounds like the bass player from the Stranglers, but this French guy, he took it.
Really sounds like a wine brand to me, J.J. Blanche. not a great wine brand, like a pretty sort of supermarket lower down the aisle wine brand.
What would you like, sir? I'd like a J.J. Blanche. Thank you. Then 1930, SMD, Scotch Malt Distillers, took it over, That became DCL, Distillers Companies Limited, UDV, United Distillers Vintners. And then in 1997, under the pairs, if you will, of Diageo. 1960, they went from 2 to 6 stills, producing around about 2 million litres a year. With the growth of single malts in 2001, it was included in the Flora and Fauna Diageo range. This was a group of whiskies primarily that went into blends. These whiskies were bottled in small quantities, primarily for independent whiskey specialists to give them something different. Since then, we've released a 12-year-old Glen Elgin, which quietly moves along and is enjoyed, but not necessarily talked about that much. We don't really have a budget for it, but it does nicely because, as I said, the major amount of it goes into blends, which is a shame. I think one day, with single malts growing, distilleries like Glen Elgin, Clynelish, Dal Ewan, Ben Rinnes, Inchgower, I'd like to think they're all going to get their moment in the spotlight at some point, hopefully anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whiskies that are featured in Flora and Fauna, they, like you say, they're sort of unsung heroes of Diageo's stable, really. But those expressions, the Flora and Fauna expressions, are almost, there's not really a bad one amongst them. They're such great whiskies and great value as well, with that understated packaging, and it's quite nice packaging, really. And it's consistent between them all. And whenever I see a bottle for sale, I'm always like, oh, might as well grab one, because they're just really tasty whiskies. But you can't get Glen Elgin in Flora. They don't do the Flora and Fauna anymore. It's just purely its own.
That's right. It's made that first leap from the second division to the championship, but not yet in the Premier. They're
exactly.
still waiting for the big leap.
I remember reading that Glen Elgin was the last distillery built in Speyside during that big whiskey boom period, and
yeah, you're right.
I think they predicted there wouldn't be another distillery built there for 50 years, and it was something like 60 years later that the next distillery was built in Speyside. So
yeah, Tormore, you're right. Yeah,
Tormore, that's right, which is a beautiful distillery. Yeah, so it's sort of, I guess, from like a chronological or like whiskey history standpoint, is like a bookend to that particular period in the late 19th century that was so many distilleries were built. Hey?
Yeah. I mean, effectively now, as I said, at Diageo, each distillery has a character, DNA, and with Glen Elgin, what Diageo want from Glen Elgin Distillery is a whiskey that's primarily on the fruity side, and to do that, effectively, they have a long fermentation. They have worm tubs, which gives a slightly fruitier note, almost like a sulfury note. In fact, here I have some new make straight off the still, Glen Elgin.
Unaged Glen Elgin, yeah.
Unaged Glen Elgin right there. And on the nose, I mean, really, it's kind of like, it's like San Pellegrino, that orange soda that you can get on the nose. It's really orchard fruits, tangerines, massive on sweet fruit, peachy, a little bit of lemon.
Well, anyone who's got a pouch in front of them will see that one of the you can't see that there. The middle one of the tasting notes in the middle there is actually a can of orange soda, which is interesting because it shows that these distillery characteristics, assuming both Colin and I am right in that tasting note, it shows that they carry through even after 11 years in oak, and that's I think, and you'll agree with me, I'm sure, that for me that's a sign of a good whiskey, is when you get that harmony between the wood and the distillery characteristic.
That's it in one. I mean, they have a long fermentation. There's about 90 hours fermentation, and
it's long.
It's kind of like there's always a balance between having a short fermentation or a long one. I mean, effectively, with a longer fermentation, you don't get any more alcohol, but you do often get a little bit more flavor and a little bit more weight.
Yeah.
And the other thing they do is they want to what's known as a clear wort. You get a choice of cloudy or clear worts, and a cloudy wort tends to generally produce a nutty, spicy note. But when I spoke to Douglas Murray at Diageo when I was doing the Malt Advocate course, he said, yeah, sometimes we want nutty and spicy, but nutty and spicy can mask other flavors. So in some of the distilleries, we request a clear wort, which has less kind of cereal notes, but tends to bring out a little bit more fruit. And a clear wort is not clear like this. It just means it's got no
Not so
sediment.
bad. Yeah. So
There's no
just for anyone
sediment.
who's not sort of fully up to speed on this, so the wort is basically the liquid that you extract off after the mashing process. So you take your malted barley and you cook it with water, and then you get this sugary liquid come off, and that's the wort. So that's the stuff which yeast is added to, and then it gets fermented. And between cloudy and clear wort, as Colin says, you do tend to get different flavors that translate right through to the finished whiskey.
Yeah, it's a really good point. You know, once you start getting into it, you start to understand, you know, the science and the mentality of what each distillery is trying to do. And when it comes down to the other factor that you find in Glen Elgin, it's the use of worm tubs, or serpent,
Yeah,
as
do
I
you
call
want to
it.
explain the difference between worm tubs and shell and tube condensers as well, just briefly, so we get an idea of
Yeah, I mean,
especially what they mean in terms of flavour?
yeah, I mean, basically, a worm tub means that there's kind of like less copper contact, but you get more sulfury notes coming through.
Mm,
And sometimes when you mix a spirit that's got those sulfury notes, particularly with an American oak barrel, you get that toffee butterscotch note
yeah.
that you're looking for. And whereas with a shell and tube condenser, and a really good example is Dalwhinnie. 30 years ago, Dalwhinnie Distillery in the Central Highlands changed from worm tubs to shell and tube condensers, and it
Mm,
ended up with a completely different liquid. And
mm,
what happened was it was a lot more. It actually didn't have the depth that Dalwhinnie is looking for. It's
yeah.
producing a lot. You still get the same
Peanut.
alcohol, but you get less flavor. It's almost like
Yeah.
one step away from a continuous still kind of
Yeah.
scenario.
It just
And
cleans it up too much because there's just so much copper contact, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I
Yeah.
think there's an old analogy I heard years and years and years ago. Somebody said to me once that with vodka, you extract all the flavors to make it pure. With whiskey, you leave in some of those
Mm.
flavors to give it individuality.
Yeah. Well, with single malt, I mean, really, I guess the aim is to retain as much flavor as possible whilst
Yeah,
making a product of acceptable or like legally acceptable alcohol level, and
yeah,
obviously stripping out anything dangerous that may have been produced during fermentation. Besides that, and actually to your point about making whiskey to blend. There may be occasions where you've got a distillery that you want to produce something fruity and light, and so you manipulate the variables, like we've talked about clear wort or shell and tube versus
yeah,
worm tub condensers in the distillation, or how the stills are run or how the stills are fired. All these different things that you can manipulate in order to try and get that target spirit style. But
yeah,
ultimately, it's
yeah.
about retaining flavor, right? You don't want to be stripping it out. Otherwise, you're moving into lighter styles of spirits, like you say, like vodka,
Yeah,
grain
yeah. I
whiskey.
mean, it's a really good example. If anybody is into books, do you remember books? They used to be quite fashionable at one time. In fact, I've got yours sitting on my shelf back here.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
there's a great book out there called Peat, Smoke and Spirit by a guy called
Yeah,
Andrew Jefford. And
yeah,
I'll just quote very quickly. There's uh, there's a page in there on each distillery, or a few pages, obviously. But when I looked at it, every distillery on Islay has a different distillation time. You know, Kilhoman, I think, was something like 6.5 hours. Lefroy was 8. Lagavulin was 11.5. Kalila was 9. They're all different. And they've all got different cuts as well.
mm,
So, to the answer to a question that I'm often asked, why is whiskey so different? It's a bit like having the same plate of food ready to be cooked, and you choose how you cook it. You know, whether
Yeah,
you use the slow food variation, or you microwave it, or you marinate it. It might be the same liquid, same product, but it's going to come out different. And
yeah.
that's what the human being has the power to do, to create
Yeah, I
something
mean,
unique.
yeah. I mean, everyone's working from the same ingredients, more or less. I mean, you might have some peated barley in there, and maybe some variation in yeast, and everyone's, even more or less the same kitchen. There is a few perhaps things that might be slightly different in there, different pieces of equipment, different types of condenser, different types of mash tun, but more or less the same. And so much of it comes down to, like you say, the person that's actually running the distillery and
Yeah,
what, and I think with also the historical legacy of the distillery. Like you say, Dalwhinnie, they changed the condensers and had to change back because it wasn't their style. We did what did we do last month? What was the whiskey? Craigellachie, not Craigellachie. Someone remind me.
Glenfarclas?
Glenfarclas. Glenfarclas. We were talking about that last month. I mean, they changed away from direct firing at one point and then back again
Yeah,
because it changed the flavour of the spirit.
right.
So these things are important, especially for older distilleries, especially distilleries that are producing a lot of liquid blends, because they're relied upon to continue to produce that same product.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I should mention, um, being with Diageo, sometimes we can be perceived as not necessarily being innovators, but believe you me, they are always experimenting. And as fate would have it, when you approached me to come on, I suddenly realized I have one bottle of Glen Elgin in the house. In the house is Glen Elgin, 18 years of age, that came out with the special releases.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, when I spoke to someone at Diageo about this particular whiskey, and he goes, "Well, it's an experiment because we normally use the same yeast strain." And he'd heard that in America, yeast strains are very much sort of prized and kept secret by the distilleries. So the Glenelgin 18-year-old is actually a blend of two different whiskies using different yeast strains.
Ah, interesting.
So I shall open this over Christmas and send you or give you a sample, COVID willing,
Yeah.
in the new year. Isn't that
Oh, thank
amazing?
you. That's great. Thanks. Well, you can fill up your empty pouch with it and send it to me through the post. We reuse the pouch, see?
Fantastic. Fantastic. Excellent.
Right. So, the whiskey itself, I've not really. Everyone probably is aware who's watching this video, but this is a pretty special whiskey this month. Not just because it's Glen Elgin, but because we bought the whole barrel.
Yeah.
We got about 153 liters, I think. By the time the pouches were filled, we had about 20 liters left over, and that's all going into bottles which are for sale for pre-order on the website. The only reason they're pre-order is just the time it takes to move whiskey around Scotland at the moment, get it filled, get it labelled, all that sort of thing. But if you're interested in buying a bottle, we are slowing down sales because we're not entirely sure how much we've got left until they're all filled. But this is a bit of a landmark moment for us. We have bought a cask before. When we crossed 1,000 subscribers, we bought a tiny little barrel of two tiny barrels of Strathern. I can't remember how big they were. I think they're about 20 litres each. So really small little things and only about 3 or 4 years old to send out. But we're sort of playing with the big boys now because this is a full-size bourbon barrel and fully mature as well at 11 years old, I would say,
Yeah.
and at cask strength. So it's pretty cool. Yes, I mean, it's not often. Normally when we get a pouch through, part of the joy of whiskey-me is that you taste it and you go, yeah, I like that. I'll buy a bottle. Well, you're not going to get that option this time unless you are very quick on the whiskey-me website, because once it's gone, and there will never be another barrel quite like this. And indeed, as Colin said, there's very little expressions of Glen Elgin officially released from the distillery. A few independent bottlings here and there, but not a great deal of that either. It's not a really, visible distillery that we see a lot of. So it's a pretty special moment. I've only tried it once, and that was when I got sent samples to taste and selected it. So I'm looking forward to trying it again now.
Fantastic.
And I must thank my father-in-law, Rod, who is watching, for donating his pouch to me this month, because, like many of you, I have fallen victim to Royal Mail this month, and they have not yet delivered my pouch. So I get pouches the same way as everyone else, and mine hasn't arrived. So cheers, Rod, for this, and we will, of course, compensate you with a pouch at some point.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
So what do you think of the whiskey, Colin? You've tried it already, right?
So for everyone at home, number one, well done for buying into this brilliant concept of tasting different whiskies every month, because the selection out there is a veritable cornucopia of flavors that you're able to try. And on the nose, I normally, and Tristan and I do a lot of whiskey analysis or tastings together, and I always try to give my first initial opinion on the nose. And I mentioned with the new make that it was full of kind of red apple, really fresh. But on the nose, I get round about 4 or 5 things. I get pear drops. I get almost like a lemon drizzle, but the big one is there's an orange flavor, and I'm putting it down as tangerine.
Yeah, I think it's tangerine. Yeah,
tangerine, maybe even white peach, but massive on that San Pellegrino can that I tried with Bullet Bourbon, by the way, which drinks exceptionally well. And then
good tip for Christmas there.
Unbelievable banana milk, which I've not had forever, which just goes to show you your olfactory glands can really bring back memories, which is fantastic.
Totally. I'm assuming you mean banana milkshake, right? Not like it's not like one of these sort of new wave almond hazelnut milks that's milked from a banana. Banana is sort of like udder shaped. You can try and
banana milkshake. That's a really, if you're looking for a whiskey that fits into the fruity spicy category, this is what it's delivering on the nose. And I'm not sure about all of you at home there, but I have to tell you that I take immense pleasure, particularly if I'm hosting a tasting pre-COVID and hopefully after COVID, when you're live. And if I've driven somewhere, I often spend more time nosing than I do drinking. But this one, I quite happily nose for 4 or 5 minutes, which, judging by the amount of talking that I've done, you've probably been doing the same. So without further ado, and I should mention just before we taste it that our palates do change. And I've actually taken the opportunity to pour it out neat here, but I've also got it with water. I'm drinking a lot of my whiskey with water at the moment. It's 50. Is it 54.1? Tristan said, is that right?
Yeah, 54.1. Yeah.
But I like to try both. I like to try it neat and with.
How much water do you put in yours on the other glass, roughly?
I put, if you can see that, I probably put 1/4. Maybe 1/3.
So you're probably down to about 40%, aren't you? Maybe a bit below.
On this one, I've gone down to about 40%. Yeah.
But yeah, tangerine, that really does stand out. And then I agree with the banana as well. Some of that bourbon cask coming through. It really is. It's fruit bowl. We've got and it's you know what? It's I liked it when I smelt the sample, but I'm appreciating the aroma even more now. Perhaps it's just because the sample wasn't 50 ml, and I know that I've got plenty to drink. It's excitement.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that is a wonderful, fruity, spicy nose. That's almost saying, "You want me? You want me? Come and get me. Come and get me." So everyone at home, on this filthy Friday, let's give it a try.
Yes. Now, Colin's got a trick he does, which tends to be with older whiskies when he does tastings normally, but I've seen him do it a number of times over the years, which is when you taste a whiskey, you need to show it some respect. And that respect is given by holding that whiskey in your mouth for the number of seconds equivalent to the number of years that it's been matured, right?
Yeah, I used to say that to Tom Ask back in the day. You know, we're tasting Blue Label now, Tom. We're going to give it 1 minute. We're going to give it 60 seconds in the mouth. And I'm telling you, I didn't believe it when I first heard it, when somebody mentioned it. There's different ways of drinking whiskey. We're not even talking about cocktails or highballs, etc. We're talking about acoustic, drinking it neat. And I honestly believe that if you can give, on average, about between 8 to 12 seconds, you're rewarded with a longer aftertaste. And although initially you're just going to get an alcoholic burn, if you stay with it, the burn diminishes and the liquid tends to get slightly thicker and richer. And I know with Blue Label, just touching on it briefly, Blue Label completely changes if you give it plenty of time. And what I found with the Glen Elgin, when I added a few drops of water, that lemon drizzle that I mentioned at the beginning, all of a sudden, right? All of a sudden,
100%.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's gone lemony. It's
lemony.
moved from tangerine to lemon. Yeah.
And I even got, this is me, I got lemon curd, and on the taste, it was almost like glycol. If it was a wine, it would be a Riesling. It would be a German Riesling, like an Auslese. It's got that oily glycol character, which is really cool.
Just look, I mean, one of the other tasting notes we put on there, you won't be able to see it on here, but you've got a pouch in front of you probably, is lemon pie. So we're really aligned here on the tasting notes, and the other one's toffee. Which let's call it banana toffee for argument's sake. And we're just about there with it, I'd say. It's probably the best tasting notes we've done on a pouch, I'd say.
Unbelievable. I mean, honestly, viewers, I had no idea about these. Tristan knows. At the end of the day, you've got to give your own opinion. And what I also would say, when I heard that I had, or was going to share a dram with Tristan, I went out and I thought, we're going to mention about talking it neat, but I also think Glen Elgin is a great food pairing. And this is what I think Glen Elgin should go with.
Chocolate donut.
A chocolate and caramel donut.
Oh. Well, you're making everyone jealous at home now. I thought you were going to pull out a pasty for a second there.
Look at that. There you go.
Look at that.
Right?
Can you drink that glass with that donut balanced on top? I want to know.
Yeah, that's the garnish.
That would be a sight to behold.
Right, and the other thing I should mention while I'm chatting to you, how I'm drinking whiskey these days, particularly after mixing with some amazing ambassadors in the Diageo stable, is I'm using a lot of mixers, and I can tell you that we featured Glen Elgin in a podcast recently. Myself and Ali Reynolds, we do a podcast called The Middle Cut on Spotify, which Tristan's been on, and we featured Glen Elgin, and we had it with Fever Tree. I haven't got it with me. This is a ginger ale, but we had Glen Elgin with a Fever Tree soda water.
Yeah.
And both Ali and I waxed lyrical about it. So it can play in different fields. It can play as a highball.
Was it just a plain soda, or was it one of the flavored ones?
It was just a plain soda, and I have got it in my memory bank that I think Fever Tree do various flavored sodas. Is that right?
Yeah, they've got quite a few now. They do some good flavored ginger ales. They do the smoky ginger ale and the spiced orange ginger ale.
Yeah.
Spiced orange ginger ale. If you're for this time of year, if you're wanting to mix whiskey, which I would advise doing, especially for sort of afternoon drinking, instead of a beer, then I would really recommend Fever Tree spiced orange ginger ale. As it mixes very well with most whiskies of Scotch.
Yeah, that's wicked. That is wicked. I mean, I don't think there will be anything left of this pouch, and I think the choice you've made, I'm not saying this to be kind, seriously, the choice you've made, this Glen Elgin, I might put my name down for a bottle of this.
We'll save you a bottle for sure. Yeah,
this is definitely got an edge to it. It scores on the nose, that lovely sort of tangerine nose that follows through with where it converts almost into lemon curd. The liquid itself is like liquid silk, basically it's leaving its business card on your tongue. That's what
Yeah.
it's doing, right? The distillery character that the blenders wanted, it's carried all the way through. And I
Yeah.
hope that just by mentioning things that don't always get talked about too much, you know, the worm tubs and the fermentation, a lot of thought has gone into it to produce this style. And I'm
Yeah.
so pleased that as a distillery, we're able to spend 30 minutes chatting about it. That's
Yeah,
probably
for
the
sure.
most time anybody's talked about Glen Elgin. You know, some people think Glen Elgin plays for
Yeah.
Plymouth Argyle, you know, in the
It's
dining.
probably the most time that's been put to it in the English language for at least 50 years, I would expect. But
Yeah,
you know, it just goes to show there are these hidden gems out there, and I think that although we work with distilleries that bottle, you know, big high volume products that you can buy in the shops.
yeah,
One of the opportunities we have now as our subscriber numbers grow is that we can buy casks every now and again and feature distilleries that, you know, it's difficult to buy a bottle of that product, or perhaps it's difficult to buy a bottle at a specific age statement or you know, at a certain stage in its maturation. So you know, that's exciting for the future, and obviously as we get even bigger, we can buy bigger casks like sherry casks and things like that.
you know,
um
I've just retasted this now, and the finish is flinty.
mm.
Initially, do you get what I mean? It's
Well,
a
I've heard you
flinty
describe
note.
whiskies as flinty before. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's gone from, it's kind of like a
Minerally.
substitute word for sweet to dry.
Mm.
Initially, I thought there might be a lick of peat there, but it's definitely that flinty note where it's said, look, we can be vivacious, we can be attractive to the eye, but underneath we've got some weight in this, and it finishes long and flinty. That's wicked.
Yeah. It's got a long finish, even with the water.
Yeah,
You know, if this was cut down to 40-year-old and 40% and stuck in a bottle, be a decent malt, like
yeah,
really nice dram. I think we did luck out and get a good cask. I mean, in all honesty, we because we knew we'd have to send this out as soon as we hit 2,500, and because our subscriber numbers were increasing so quickly, we had
yeah,
to pull the whole thing together quite quickly. So we reached out to a couple of brokers and to see what casks they had, and B, what samples they could send us quickly, so that we could taste, purchase what we wanted, and then get it ready for filling and all that kind of thing.
yeah.
And yeah, I think we were just lucky to have this particular cask as a sample come to us.
Well, I think you've chosen well, and for all of you at home, I think Tristan has and Tom have chosen a real winner here. I definitely think that it scores, and it's just another distillery on Speyside that is oozing a bit of class without too many people knowing about it, and I kind of like that. I like the
Mm,
fact that with all the distilleries that we have, the fact that you can go out and purchase this liquid and put it out as a single cask offering to your members, I think that's fantastic. Really,
yeah,
what
really.
a great whiskey.
Yeah, cool. Well, look, thanks so much for your time, Colin. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to go and drink the rest of this now, I think. Thanks again,
Yeah,
Rod, for giving it to me.
yeah.
um,
I'm playing out with. It's Christmas time, right?
there you
Thank
go.
you
You
for
don't normally
having me,
get
Tristan.
soundtrack. Yeah, we don't normally get. We're going to have to start upping our game and putting a soundtrack in from now on, because that's pretty cool.
That was my
Um,
Christmas exit track.
it's brilliant. Right. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you in the new year with new whiskies. And cheers again, Colin. That was excellent. Over and out. Goodbye. Ciao.